And it a lot of it will depend on the music I'm listening to at the time. You know, if I'm listening to a lot of Beach Boys, that's like a very different kind of lush than something more modern.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I was really influenced by that Spiritualized record. I don't know if you know that one, Ladies and Gentlemen, We're Floating in Space.
No, I don't know it. You'll have to send me a link.
Yeah, it like came out in the like 2001 or something, and it really just kind of like changed the kind of indie rock landscape, I think, of like the bands that we probably really like Radiohead and a lot of offshoots of that kind of darker indie world. So, you know, I think like generally I try and go for things that are really lush, but once I got into film composing and everything's about being lush, I think now I'm more on the trajectory of like getting rid of every element that's not incredibly essential.
Yeah.
And then maybe at the end, and then maybe at the end, just kind of like putting a little frosting on the cake. And so,
so it's a dynamic, you know, being an artist is a dynamic process, right? Like we go through different stages.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't think I have like a specific aim when I'm making a song. I'm not trying to like do it on any timeline unless I'm working with somebody else. So I'm really just kind of okay with letting things flow and, you know, listening to it a week later and seeing how I feel about a certain texture. And I definitely go way too far. And it's something I want to try and clean up in my process. But yeah, I can't say I like totally follow a template because I do a lot of, you know, acoustic guitar-based tracks. I do a fair amount of electronic tracks and, you know, a fair amount of just kind of band in the room sounding tracks. So depending on the genre, I think they all come together quite differently. If it's a band in the room thing, you know, you definitely want that rhythm section being as tight as possible before starting anything else.
Yeah.
Or else you're always kind of chasing your tail.
100%. What's the bulk of what you're doing these days? Are you doing more songwriting yourself or are you doing more working with other artists?
I guess more songwriting myself. I mean, you know, there's always like a couple of projects that I'm mixing or producing. I think the TV stuff is taking up a lot of my time, but right now I'm working on a new record, so my focus is there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So do you have any templates in terms of like, you know, the DAW and the software you work with? And that said, is there anything else you do to work faster or get inspired quicker?
I can't say I do. I mean, that sounds like a good idea. I probably should have some. The only templates I have is mixing templates. And it's really simple, but I just like to have everything in sends, you know, so like all the drums are grouped together and bass and guitars and, you know, have a reverb and delay send and maybe some like parallel sends. So yeah, for me, templates really only come, like they only really speed up my process in the mixing stage. Got it. But anything else that you do to work faster? I try and get really good at the part before recording it. I find that can save me like, exactly. That can save me a ton of time. And wasted hard drive space. Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, I look at it as a profession, but I've always tried to look at it as like just playing with toys. And the more I get lost in templates, the less it is about that. I mean, obviously, like if a band comes in and they want to record and you can kind of tell a general direction of what they want to do, you can set up a template to just make that quicker. But again, like I never really done that in a production way. And I almost find like if I'm at the point where I'm making templates, I should probably just like stop personally. It's like, it's not fun anymore. It like becomes too scientific. I totally hear you, man. But, you know, economically, that's a horrible idea. Yeah. It's a long process, sounds like. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be long, but, you know, there should just be kind of, I think the first step in any production is always like a bit magical, you know, and let that be that. It could just be like a really amazing, intimate take of an acoustic guitar and a voice or something. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to start with a beat or a synth or, you know, I don't know how different people would approach it. And obviously it would depend on their styles. Right. So you were talking about how it's just, you know, you want to have fun and you're basically playing. So that said, do you have any of your favorite tools or toys? Yeah. I have a lot of toys for sure. My favorite synth has been my Prophet. I have a Prophet 6. Wow. That kind of changed the game for me for sure. And then I have like, you know, obviously a bunch of guitar pedals. I just got an upright piano, which also has changed the game. I think like there's a lot to be said about even just different guitars or different basses can change the sound of a record so much. I just got a new bass that I'm really digging in. And that's like really changed the sound of my recordings more than like I thought it would.
Yeah. I mean, as a bass player, I could tell you that,
yeah, for sure.
The bass itself is such a, the way the mid-range is or whatever,
Totally.
It affects everything.
Yeah, it's this Jaguar bass or Mustang bass. I don't even know what the difference is sometimes, but it's
yeah. I saw a picture of it on your website. Those are supposed to sound amazing.
Yeah, really, really fat mid-range. It's not going to have like the bottom of like a P bass or something, but really great for like indie rock and certain styles and varieties of electronic music and stuff.
Amazing. Do you have any favorite like tools and toys within, the computer?
I definitely love like the Spectrasonics bundle, like the Omnisphere and Keyscape.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's really fun, especially for like the film side of things. I find Logic to be amazing in terms of what it offers in that realm.
Yeah.
All the software instruments. I've been using that Alchemy plugin quite a bit on Logic.
Yeah, Alchemy is great.
In terms of like plugins, I love the UA stuff. I love the Soundtoys stuff. When I was like earlier into production, I was using some of the Isotope plugins like Effectrix. And have you ever messed around with that stuff? It's like quantizing effects.
I don't know that one. I know Trash and what's their vocoder one? I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I've never messed around with vocoders. It's just always sounded like just a bit too far for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed a lot of interesting vocal effects on your recordings. Can you share your thought process on how and when to affect the vocal?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it will depend on like my vocal approach. Like if I want something to be more intimate or weirder, or if I want to mask lyrics more, for whatever reason. There's a song on Together Alone called Act 2, and that's actually an example of where it took me like 7 or 8 months to edit drums. I just did like a bunch of drum passes with brushes and sticks and run them through chaos pads and just kind of tried to make it all sound organic. And so for that one, for the vocal take, just something didn't feel right when I was singing into like a wide diaphragm condenser mic. It just felt too rich and too like there was just no mystery to it. And so I ended up doing it through a 4-track, which does this really nice thing to the top end and just kind of like removes all the bottom end in this really extreme way. And then ran it through that chaos pad, like the red and black one that's mainly for effects, and like added, and like if you like sweep your hand across, then it like affects the pitch range. So you can get these like really bizarre gliding harmonies.
Wow.
And so I think it, like the end result was a lot more minimal than what I was experimenting with. But that's an example of, something that I went pretty vocal effect heavy with. I feel like if I'm doing that, I'll generally go hardware or guitar pedals over software plugins.
Cool.
But that little Alter Boy by Soundtoys is pretty cool.
Yeah, I have that one. It's fun.
Definitely use that. Sometimes, actually, if I'm like looking to make a chorus kind of pop more vocally, I'll keep the pitch the same, but adjust the formants a little higher and lower the mix. So it just kind of feels like almost like a slightly female version of myself is harmonizing with me, but you don't even realize it, but it can make something cut through a mix in a really nice way.
Nice. I like that. Also, your snare drums are super, I feel like you have a signature snare drum sound almost in a sense in terms of like, it's like very fat and aggressive. Is there something that you do in terms of that?
It's probably a lot to do with the way my drummer plays, but I actually think I'm like going through a snare drum shift right now. I'm like trying to tune them as low as possible. Get that like fat thud. But I think like I don't run the snare through any specific hardware. I mean, I have this 6-channel console that's pretty like punchy and aggressive. So a lot of the sound could come through that for sure. I like to use an SM7 on the snare a lot. It like just gives it way more body.
Right, the bigger diaphragm dynamic mics have a lot more fidelity, I think.
Yeah, or like an RE20. Yeah, that could be part of it. I mean, generally there's like a wallet on the snare and something just to deaden it, which, you can probably just get more volume if there's less tone.
Right, that's true. So is there anything that you do specifically in your productions that you think gives you a trademark sound?
I'm not sure, and I'm honestly a little insecure about that. Like, I kind of wish I had a bit more of a trademark sound. I think, like, when people listen to my albums, they tell me that they sound very cohesive, but the way that it was put together for me was so non-cohesive. So I'm like sometimes wondering what that cohesion is. I mean, I think a fair amount of it is just like the way my ears like to hear music and the way it's mixed.
Yeah.
And I think once I got that profit, like that sound definitely shows up in a lot of my recordings since then. But I think a fair amount of it is probably my voice, the acoustic guitar that I mainly use, and the microphones that I mainly use.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think you have a trademark sound.
What would you describe it as? Or I guess what elements would you say are unique, or I don't know. Maybe there's...
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to keep this on the podcast, but the way you were describing how detail oriented you are with the rhythm section, I think that definitely comes across. Yeah, and your voice and the creative use of effects that you're using to kind of keep things not as obvious as they might be otherwise, Right. I think there's like a certain amount of like you leave a lot of mystery with the way you affect things. That's kind of my take on things. Cool. And I like that.
Cool.
We come from similar taste backgrounds, I guess, in a sense,
Yeah.
So how do you balance your creative vision with those of the artists you work with?
I mean, my feeling is that the artist is always right, as much as that can hurt sometimes. But like, I have felt really threatened in situations where I was the artist and the person kind of like running the controls didn't trust my vision or didn't trust when I didn't like something. And, that's just like the worst feeling in the world as an artist, because as great as the producer might be, like at least for me, if I'm not feeling the song, I know it's not where it should be. Like, yeah, maybe I'll come around to it in like a few years or whatever, but I don't want to wait that long. And so when I'm working, sometimes they'll just be like, hey man, you got full reign. And sometimes it'll be, where I'm just literally putting mics up for them. But usually it's somewhere in between. And, it's obviously really fun when I get full reign over the creative process, but I'm always checking in with the artist, because if they're not psyched, then you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Or you may not be doing something wrong, but it's worth pushing more. Because when you're in that collaborative space and both parties are just, full of joy, like that's the space you want to make music in.
Yeah, 100%.
So I'm always, even just psychologically, I'm always kind of taking stock of how they're doing and want to make sure that they're feeling good.
I like that.
Because I can get lost too as a producer.
Yeah. You dig in too deep and you can lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're just like waiting on the sidelines.
So most of us tend to fluctuate between high and low levels of creativity. Do you do anything specific when you need to get inspired?
Sometimes I do the morning. Have you ever heard of the morning pages, like The Artist's Way?
No.
So it's a book written by Julia Cameron. A lot of people I know have been influenced by it. But it's basically like this idea of writing 3 full pages every morning, just of like random free association. And I was doing a lot of that actually when I was writing Religion, but I like almost became psychotic. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Wow.
Like it really kind of messes with your consciousness in I think a really good way. Like you sort of at first feel really creative, like, whoa, like all these channels are opening up, and then you like, can get pretty depressed and bipolar from it. And then I think like at a certain point I like came around and was like, wow, I just let a lot of that out. I feel so much better.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just stepping away. Like for me right now, actually, I'm trying to record a song that I wrote a long, long time ago, like in 2012 or something. And I never put it on a record because it had too much of like a country vibe, and it just didn't really fit aesthetically with the rest of the stuff that I was doing. But I've just been, I think this will be my like 3rd album with Howard now, and I did a few with my older band and some EPs, and like I think you just kind of reach a point in your creative career where like if you have songs like in the bin, like let's try and workshop them, because like to write a whole nother brand new 12 songs is like a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I think like for me it's like I'll go like through like just old demos and see what can be workshopped. And I'll usually write like 8 new